Welcome to the first installment of Chapter 5, which is our chapter on language. Today we're looking at kind of how languages are organized and how language is distributed, so it'll be pretty quick. And then actually the next one I'm going to combine. So 2 and 3 will be merged into one lecture, so you can just watch it after you do Key Issue 3 bookwork, and you'll just take notes on 2 and 3. I can explain that again in class if that doesn't make sense. So there won't be one for 2 specifically, there'll be one for 2 and 3, so you probably want to wait till you read 2 and 3 to actually do the notes. Okay, so first off, what is language? It is a system of communication. It can be written and spoken. Actually, not all languages have a written component. Some languages are purely spoken. That would probably tend to be more common in folk cultures than pop cultures, but like an example, a folk culture could actually be a language, and it might be a language that is not written, that is purely spoken. The other thing that happens with folk cultures is their languages are often more susceptible to something that we're going to be talking about a lot, which is language extinction, which is basically when languages no longer exist. That usually happens because the people who speak that language die off and they don't pass it down to younger generations. Currently, the language of Paiute, which is indigenous to our area, is actually on its way out as well, and we're making a lot of efforts now to try and preserve that language. I don't know if it's still a class at our school, but for a while you could take Paiute at our school, which was one way that we were trying to kind of revive that language. So how many languages are there today? Probably about 4,000, but again, some of these cultures are very remote and isolated and have their own languages, so there could be lots of other languages that we don't even know about, so it's kind of hard to say. So why do languages spread? What causes language to diffuse? The number one thing is war and conquest, and I'm going to skip ahead for a second. So you can see that the languages of countries that did a lot of colonialism and were active in colonialism and imperialism are also the languages that are widely spread. Primarily English. So we know that England had all of these locations as colonies at one time, which is why they all now speak English, right? Spanish. So we have Spain right here. Has diffused to Latin America, right? Minus Brazil, which is Portuguese, because the Portuguese conquered Brazil. And then this has to do a lot with things fall apart in imperialism, like we've mentioned in previous lectures. Africa was split up between lots of different European countries, and that's why in Africa you can find lots of different languages, most of which are European, except for in North Africa we have lots of Arabic languages because they were conquered by the Ottoman Empire rather than a European country. Okay, something to keep in mind with Africa though, actually. So although these languages are spoken, it's also very common for locations to have tribal languages as well, and sometimes those kind of converge to make like cultures that speak more than one language. But you would be surprised as we go through this unit, lots of people all over the world speak multiple languages. We're kind of unique in the US that a lot of us only speak one language, myself included. I wish I spoke more. Okay, we'll go backwards a little bit here. So another thing that happens is just through migration, relocation, diffusion. Okay, isolation is more for folk languages. Okay. And then economic development, the spread of technology. So an example here would be English. Most business around the world is done in English, whether or not that country speaks it. So we do a lot of business with China. Obviously, they speak Chinese, but lots of people in China also speak English. And a lot of that has to do with the business relationships that we have around the world. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but English is known as a lingua franca, which means that it is widely spoken for a majority of purposes throughout the world. Used to be French, but now it's English. Most business is done in English. Okay, so So there's different parts of language as well. So one of which is a logogram. And they're kind of like hieroglyphics that you may have heard of. It's when a symbol represents an idea or a sound. Okay, I mean, it represents an idea, not a sound. Sorry, I'm getting that mixed up with something else. Okay, so here's some examples of some hieroglyphics. And then also, the Chinese language, the written language, very different than English, where our letters represent a sound, like a B represents B, right? Theirs represent ideas. So all of their characters in their language represent some sort of idea, which is very different, which is also why English speakers have a very hard time learning Chinese. It's a very, very different language. Okay. We have a phonetic language, which is when you have an alphabet and the alphabet represents sounds. So there's two types. So we have an alphabet language, which is a phonetic language, but there's also syllabary, which means a symbol can have a sound. So instead of like an alphabetic letter, they'll have a symbol, but it still represents a sound, which makes it a phonetic language. Okay, so an example of that would be Japanese, or Cherokee also works that way. Okay. Really, really important. This, I believe, is on page 145 of your textbook. We were going to make these in class, but because we're really hitting the FRQ and doing some other things, we're probably not going to have time. So this is what I would recommend. Using either this one, you can pause it, or using the one on page 145 in your book, I would make myself, if I were you, on your cram sheet, a little mini language tree. And I wouldn't say you need all of these languages, but I would look at most of these branches and try to get like maybe the top 3 spoken languages. And the way you know what the majority languages are is the bigger the leaf is, that means more speakers. So what I would do, again, like I would draw myself on my cram sheet a little mini language tree, and I would make like an Afro-Asiatic branch and write down, make like 3 languages. The leaves are the languages, by the way. And I can go over in class how to read this, and I'm going to go over it here now. So hopefully this will make sense. So we have language families, which are the branches of the tree, the trunks of the tree, I should say. Okay? The language branches are the branches of the tree. And then the language groups, let's see if I can find some language groups for you. North Germanic would be a language group and things like that, okay? And then within each language, there are different dialects and accents. Those aren't represented on this tree, but we'll talk about dialects and accents a little bit later, okay? So again, in your cram sheet, I would put this, I would make myself a mini one of these, and I would memorize it. So I would memorize the branches, the trunks, and I would also memorize the top 3 leaves on each, okay? You're definitely going to get questions that ask you, like, what branch does Mandarin Chinese belong to? You're going to need to be able to explain that. So basically how to read these. So Indo-European, since it has the thickest trunk, that means that it's the largest family in languages, okay? And you will notice that a lot of these languages up here look familiar. So Germanic languages include English, okay, West Germanic languages, so this is the branch. The branch of Romance languages includes French, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, so other very widely spoken languages, okay? And this also shows you that all of these languages coming off of Indo-European are related in some way. So you will find lots of similarities amongst all of those languages, okay? The other large branch on our tree here, Margie, shh, come here, come here, come talk to the kids, come say hi. Sorry. So Sino-Tibetan has the biggest leaf of all, which is Mandarin Chinese. So Mandarin Chinese has the most speakers in the world, but the most widely spoken language in the world is English. So what that means is Mandarin has the most speakers, but all over the world, lots and lots of people speak English. Okay, so it's the most widely spoken. Anything else I want to point out to you here? So there's lots of other branches that come off of this, so all of these would be related. The Niger-Congo family here has branches. All of those would be related. So you can kind of see, just based on this tree, where some languages might also have some similarities. Now, something I want to point out really quick. Japanese and Korean do not belong to any family. So Japanese and Korean are both very, very isolated languages, and that might make sense when we go back to this map. Japanese and Korean are not widely spoken. They are pretty much just spoken within their own countries. And a lot of that has to do with their history. They haven't been countries that did a lot of conquering or colonization or anything like that, so their languages never really spread. And because of that, other languages were not built off of those languages. So those are two unique languages in that they're very isolated when it comes to this language tree. Okay. So this is just an example kind of what this looks like when it's listed out. So we're using English as an example, our U.S. example. So our language family is Indo-European. Okay, see right there? Our language branch is Germanic. Ooh, come on. Right here, that's our branch. Our language group is West Germanic. Okay. So West Germanic. So the whole thing's Germanic, and then it's hard to see on this, but it splits off to North Germanic and West Germanic. Okay. Our language is English, which would be the leaf. Okay. So these are just example dialects, but what if you're from Massachusetts? You're from Boston, Massachusetts. Your dialect would be Northeast, which has to kind of do with your region, a regional dialect. Ours sounds a little bit different in the West than it would in the Northeast, and the accent would be, so when you notice that people talk differently than you, that has to do with the accent. We'll talk about the difference between the two, but when Bostonians say something like park your car around the corner, like that's an accent, okay? Where we would say park your car around the corner, they say park the car around the corner. Okay. And then I just wanted to point out the largest family, right? The one with the biggest branch is Indo-European, and that includes most European languages and all of the Germanic languages as well. Okay, so this kind of just shows you 3 billion speakers within Indo-European. It just kind of shows you the top 3. And Japanese, even though it is isolated, still has a lot of speakers. Okay, so I believe that's it. So again, I would definitely put a mini tree on your cram sheet. I know it'll take up space, but you're actually you're covering a lot of bases just by having that language tree on there. The other thing I would do if I were you guys is I would put this in your map journals. If we have time to do this in class, I will try to fit it in if we have some time. But if we don't get to it in class, just do it on your own. Okay, you can just print yourself out a map of the world and color in the languages because you definitely want to know which locations speak what. Okay, so that is it for today. Like I said, so don't watch anything for Key Issue 2 for next reading. Wait until you finish Key Issue 3, and then the lecture will be on both 2 and 3. Okie smoky. See you later, geographers.